Hello and welcome back to the Developing AF Data References video tutorial series. In this video we are going to discuss context types for value retrieval in an AF data reference. We will have a look at where they are used and how you can support them in your data reference. First of all, what are contexts? I would like to describe these contexts as the relevant constraints and information that are used in the value retrieval behavior of an AF data reference. So basically, the contexts hold information about the time and the current situation that your AF data reference will need to come up with the correct values. Where are these contexts used? Well, basically these contexts are used wherever your data reference is requested values. So the most important one will be the instance GetValue method that you can override from the virtual GetValue method of the AF data reference object. The second one would be the GetValues method. This is also an instance method that you can override from AF data reference, and this method is used to get multiple values. Another one is the static GetValue method, and this method is used to get values from several attributes that implement your AF data reference. You basically have to implement the GetValue method, then your data reference will automatically also support the GetValues and GetValue static method. But if you want to further optimize your data reference, you can implement those other two methods to get a more optimized communication, for instance with an external database, or to run your calculations more optimized. So only the GetValue instance method is really required. The other two methods are for optimization. There are a few different context types, and these context types have to do with how your data reference GetValue method is being called. You can indicate which context you support by implementing the supported context property. Here you can indicate which AF data reference context you support. For instance, in the first example we support time and time range. In the other part of the sheet you will find a short description of all the context types. I would say that the most important ones that you need to support are time and time range, and you also have to take in account that no context will be supported, so that basically means a null context. The other three, so case, analysis and model, you can support them and you are allowed to support them, but in the most modern AF environments, the situations where these contexts are used are not that widely available anymore. But for a legacy situation where you, for instance, make use of analysis rule plugins, you can certainly support them. So let's have a look at the GetValue method. How it works is that if an AF attribute GetValue method is being called, the AF SDK will automatically call your GetValue method of the data reference. So for instance, if you call a GetValue method without any parameters, you will get an empty context and you will also get an empty time context. The values of the input attributes and input values will depend if you have previously been called getInputs and if you have implemented your getInputs. But that's something we will talk about in a later video. So also, for instance, if a GetValue with an AF time is being called, your GetValue parameters will be context will be nil, time context will have an object of AF time, and the input attributes and the input values again depend on the fact if you have implemented getInputs, but that's something we will talk about in the later videos. The GetValues method works in roughly the same way. The GetValues method you can implement to optimize multiple value retrieval for your AF data reference. So GetValues can be called on an AF attribute, for instance with a time range and with a number of values. You can also supply an UOM, so that's the desired UOM. That's also something we will be talking about in a later video. But that indicates how AF SDK will translate the UOM that your data reference supports to the desired UOM. So when calling GetValues on an AF attribute, if we supply a AF time range and a int 32 with the number of values, you will see that will get translated to an empty context, a time range that holds the supply time range, and the number of values will be translated in the same way. The input attributes and the input values will also depend on if you have implemented get inputs. The static getValue method is a little bit different. You can implement the static getValue method on your AF data reference. You do not need to override it because virtual static methods do not exist in the .NET framework. You just have to implement it like the example. The getValue method, the static getValue method, is used to retrieve multiple attribute values. So you can supply a list of attributes, of a attribute list, and you can make sure your data reference use the most optimized way to get all those values. For instance, the PyPoint data reference uses it to get multiple PyPoint values at once from the server. So this means that there will be much less round trips than going to these individually. If you do not implement this method, AF SDK will call the instance getValue method repeatedly with the appropriate translated context. This also works, but there are situations where you want a more highly optimized data reference. So then it will be best to implement this. So here's an example of a instance getValue methods. As you can see, we are using the example of the previous video where we created a very simple data reference that will return the current hour. If we have a look at the supported context, in this case we support time and we support time range. And once the getValue method is being called, we always know that context is nil because we will not support AF cases, analysis. So we focus on the time context. In this case we have not implemented any getInput attributes, so input attributes and input values will be nil. First we will check if the time context is of type AF time. When it is, we will use AF time.localTime, so we use the local time of the AF time and we return the number of hours. And the time of our value will be the time that has been requested. We can also check if it's an AF time range. If we do, we use the total hours of the time range, of the span, of the difference between the two timestamps, and we return that value. And in this case I've chosen to return the end time of the time range as the time of the value. So there's also a good possibility that no context will be supplied. For instance, when you use System Explorer, then no context will be given and it's up to our implementation to return the current value. So in our case we use the current time, datetime.now, and we return the number of hours in this day. And we supply the current time as the timestamp for our value. So a few tips. It's really important to check your context and time context for null values. There could be a case where you use preview values, or that a getValue method without any parameters is being used on that AF data reference. So in this case you always want to check and you want to make sure you have some way to provide a current value. If you want to further optimize your AF data reference, you can implement getValues, or you can implement the static getValue. This will make sure you have the most optimized and quickest way of retrieving the data. And again, implementing time and time range context is usually enough. If you are dealing with a system that makes use of analysis rules with cases, then you should also support that. But in the most modern environment, these are not being used anymore.